The Two Princes. Going back many years, the kingdom of Rada was ruled by King Nagaraj and his consort, Queen Sarala. Then came the day when a troupe of strolling players visited the capital. The star performer of these players was a girl named Lasya, who was not only extremely beautiful, but also a gifted singer and dancer. When the players gave a performance at the palace, King Nagaraj was so enraptured by Lasya's beauty that he decided on the spot she would become his second wife. The next morning, the king sent for the leader of the troupe and offered him 1,000 pieces of gold for Lasya's hand. At first, the leader hesitated, but the sight of so many gold coins overcame his greed, and Lasya became a queen, the king's favorite wife. In time, Queen Sarala had a son named Rahul, while Queen Lasya gave birth the following year to Yashpal. As the boys grew, Prince Rahul excelled his half-brother in every way, which filled Yashpal's heart with jealousy and bitterness. One day, the two princes were playfully sparring with maces. Yashpal, poor at combat, lost his temper and struck Rahul with a foul blow. Furious, Rahul threw aside his mace and sent Yashpal reeling with his fist. When Queen Lasya saw her son's bruised eye, rage consumed her, and she stormed into the king's chamber demanding punishment for Rahul. The king, fearful of her temper, summoned Rahul and threatened to strip him of succession if he did not treat Yashpal as an equal. Queen Sarala, hearing of the king's wrath, feared for her son's safety. She rushed to Rahul's chamber and begged him to flee to her father's kingdom of Magadha for protection. But Rahul refused, declaring that a prince must not run from danger. He promised to prove himself worthy of the crown. With tears in her eyes, Sarala offered him gold to raise an army, but Rahul gently declined, saying he would fight his own battles honorably. Sarala's fears proved justified. The people of Rada adored Rahul as a prince of virtue and despised Yashpal for his cruelty. Queen Lasya, realizing her son could never rule while Rahul lived, hired a band of brigands to ambush and kill the crown prince. But her plots failed thanks to Rahul's loyal companion, Gadadhar, a brave nobleman who never left the prince unguarded. Gadadhar's vigilance saved Rahul's life more than once. Hot-headed by nature, Gadadhar once confronted Yashpal at the palace gates. Grabbing his arm, he warned in a fierce voice that if any harm befell Prince Rahul, Yashpal would pay with his life. From that moment, hatred flared openly between their followers. The palace became divided, and tempers ran high as both factions prepared to draw swords at the slightest insult. The crisis came when a trader brought a fine white horse to the palace. Gadadhar purchased it for Rahul, but Yashpal demanded it be sold to him instead. When the trader explained it already belonged to the crown prince, Yashpal mocked that soon the horse, and the throne, would be his. His servants moved to seize the steed, but Gadadhar and Rahul's men drew swords, and a fierce skirmish erupted. At the first sight of steel, Yashpal and most of his men fled into the palace, though several of his followers were slain. Queen Lasya cried that it was a plot to murder her son, and the furious king ordered Rahul and his companions banished from Rada. The people wept when the decree was read aloud, mourning the exile of their beloved prince. Queen Sarala begged her son to seek refuge in Magadha once more. With a heavy heart, the crown prince departed the capital, accompanied by Gadadhar and a few loyal followers. Riding through storm-dark plains, they reached the flooded river Ganga. Despite the danger, they decided to cross with their horses. Midway, a violent storm struck, and the raging current scattered the party far apart. Fighting against the torrent, Rahul was swept downstream. At last, clinging to his frightened horse's bridle, he reached the far bank exhausted. When he searched along the shore for Gadadhar and his men, there was no trace of them. Grief-stricken, he realized that all his loyal friends had drowned in the flood. Left with little more than his courage, Rahul journeyed onward toward Magadha. He relied on humble villagers for food and shelter, sleeping beneath open skies. One evening he reached the outskirts of Jhanispure, where he saw a group of gamblers laughing and playing dice. Curious, he paused to watch their game, and before long, they invited him to join. At first, Rahul hesitated to risk his few remaining coins, but luck soon turned in his favor. He won every round until the gamblers' purses were empty. When they prepared to leave, Rahul smiled and insisted they share the winnings equally. Touched by his generosity and nobility, the gamblers swore to become his loyal bodyguards and travel with him on his journey. At that time, the king of Jhanispure was celebrating Nag Panchami, the festival of the serpents. While watching the festivities, Rahul saw the lovely princess of Jhanispure and vowed that one day he would win her hand. His companions promised to help him, inspired by his valor and charm. The next morning, they sought an audience with the king to tell him of Prince Rahul's exile and noble birth. Hearing their tale, the king was intrigued and summoned Rahul to court. When he entered, the hall fell silent. His bearing and grace impressed everyone, even the princess. The king found him worthy and soon announced the betrothal of Rahul and the princess of Jhanispure. Joy swept through the palace, and preparations for their wedding began at once. Rahul's happiness overflowed when his long-lost friend Gadadhar arrived at court. Gadadhar told how he had been struck unconscious by debris while crossing the Ganga and rescued by woodcutters downstream. Believing Rahul drowned, he had stayed in the forest until he heard of the prince's betrothal. Overjoyed, he rode night and day to rejoin his lord. Soon after, the grand wedding of Prince Rahul and the princess of Jhanispure was held with splendor. The celebrations lasted 7 days, filled with music, flowers, and blessings from every province. Yet joy turned to alarm when a messenger arrived bearing news. King Nagaraj had died suddenly, and Prince Yashpal had seized the throne of Rada. Rahul at once dispatched an envoy to demand his rightful succession as crown prince. Yashpal scornfully refused to yield. Resolute, Rahul gathered his new allies and marched toward Rada, placing Gadadhar in command of his army. Trumpets echoed through valleys as banners of Jhanispure joined those of Rada's exiled men. A great battle raged across the plains of Rada. Swords clashed, drums thundered, and dust veiled the sun. Rahul's cavalry swept through the enemy ranks with unstoppable force. The field trembled under hooves as Gadadhar led the charge beside his prince. Through smoke and chaos, Rahul sought out Yashpal, who was rallying his fleeing men. The two princes met face to face amid fallen standards. Yashpal fought bravely but was soon disarmed. Rahul raised his sword high for the final strike, then paused, hearing his late father's words of mercy. Sheathing his sword, Rahul commanded his half-brother to surrender. "For the sake of our father and your mother, your life will be spared," he declared. Yashpal fell to his knees, humbled before Rahul's grace. The surviving soldiers laid down their arms, ending the war that had divided Rada. When Queen Lasha heard of Rahul's mercy, she was overcome with shame for her past deceit. She came before him in tears, begging forgiveness. Rahul bowed respectfully and spoke gently. "Mother, you have nothing to fear. Both you and Yashpal are dear to my heart." Peace returned to Rada. Rahul was crowned king amid joyful celebration. Bells rang from every temple, and petals rained upon the procession. Beside him stood the princess of Jhanispure, now his queen, radiant with pride and affection. Under King Rahul's rule, justice and prosperity flourished. The farmers sang at dawn, merchants thrived, and scholars filled the courts. He governed with fairness, guided by wisdom learned through exile and battle. His kingdom grew in harmony and strength. Years passed, and Rahul's fame spread across neighboring lands. Rada and Jhanispure stood united under his reign, joined later by the prosperous kingdom of Magadha. The people hailed him as Rahul the Merciful, the king who conquered through virtue rather than vengeance. When he ascended the throne, Rahul proved to be a great king, beloved by his subjects. Eventually, he became the ruler of both the kingdoms of Jhanispure and Magadha. His story endured for generations, teaching that courage, mercy, and righteousness are the true marks of nobility.